I still remember the thick hush of the library's back room, a silence so deep it felt like a hidden pocket of an alternate world. It was the kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat. Yet it was in that very hush that I found the battered paperback with top 10 games you can play in your head by yourself scrawled across its cover in peeling gold letters. I was there for a research paper on archaic mental games and folklore, a niche interest, maybe, but something about these obscure manuals always captured my imagination. I never dreamed it would lead me to the strangest adventure of my life. The author's name, J. Bart, was half-faded. Most pages were dog-eared or frayed. Tucked between the front cover and the first page was a single sheet of lined paper with a testimonial from a man named Danny G. I skimmed that note with mild curiosity, until certain lines leapt off the page at me. I spent 2 days in real life, but 17 days in the desert inside the game. Found a hidden copy of the rules to escape. This game is addictive, possibly infinite. Beware. I kept reading, absorbing every word like it was an illicit secret. The game he was referring to was called Another Life. And its instructions were concise, only 4 rules. 1. Choose another life to live. 2. Imagine yourself living it, committing to it fully in your mind. 3. Continue until you either reach a logical conclusion or learn a life lesson. 4. Re-anchor yourself to reality and stop imagining. Afterwards, you're supposed to picture returning to a special sanctuary in your head where you keep treasures from all the games you've played. The text warned about a shadow that lurked in the sanctuary, a tangible presence that could snatch or corrupt your mementos. Everything about it fascinated me. The entire concept felt at once dangerously tantalizing and strangely comforting, as if it promised an escape from the mundanity of daily life. But danger might as well have been stamped on every sentence. Losing yourself was a real possibility. And the only real caution was a single line from J. Bart: "This is not a game for the faint of heart. If you get lost, there is no guarantee you'll find your way back." I should have left it there on that dusty shelf. But I'm stubborn, or maybe curious to a fault. Later that night, hunched over my tiny kitchen table, I started to play. I ignored that gnawing sense of dread. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, letting the images come of their own accord. The first sign I'd gone too far was the shift. It was as if my living room peeled away like an old film strip in a projector. Suddenly I was floating inside a sky tinted the darkest of crimsons, so full of rolling clouds it looked like swirling blood. Massive metal towers erupted from the ground far below, jagged spires and labyrinthine architecture bridging from one tower to another. At first, I was disembodied, observing. Then I looked down and saw my own figure, myself, but with short silver hair, wearing a sleeveless jumpsuit of deep charcoal fabric. A swirling aura of raw energy clung to me like a second skin. I didn't have time to puzzle over the how or why. A thunderclap rang across the horizon. An inexplicable wind whipped at me. My aura flared, crackling with an otherworldly power. The sky was alive with a haunting electricity, and so was I. This was the beginning of my other life, and I was dangerously close to forgetting the real one. I soared between the towers as if the wind lifted me like a leaf. I wasn't fully in control but wasn't a mere passenger either. I was conscious of my body's capabilities and, even more dangerously, aware of an exhilarating sense of power. I could hear the hum of it in my ears, like the droning of a million bees. Some primal instinct told me I was here for a reason. Memories in this new body, false memories or maybe illusions conjured by the game, told me I had come to save someone. My mother. But from what? From him. I didn't know who that him was until I spotted a flicker of emerald light in the distance. A pulsing green glow at the end of a swirling silver tunnel built into one of the thickest metal spires. My heart thundered in my chest. I swooped down, landing at the mouth of the tunnel. Its entrance twisted like a metal snake, lit from within by flickering sconces that resembled luminous crystals. Each step I took echoed across the curving walls. In that moment, I realized I had a name for the figure I was about to face, the green hologram. I didn't know how I knew that, but the name pulsed in my mind. My silver hair glinted under the strange lights as I advanced. I could sense the presence of my mother somewhere deeper in the spire, an urgent magnet pulling me forward. A sharp laugh echoed, bouncing off the curved walls. Then I saw it. A faceless green silhouette, floating midair at the tunnel's core. Its elongated limbs shifted in a shimmering dance, and the electric green hologram seemed to ripple like waves. Something about it was deeply unsettling. Even without facial features, it felt like it was looking directly into my soul. Then, a hiss of static, and tendrils of brilliant azure energy erupted from its chest. They struck me before I could raise a defense. Gah! I screamed, slamming into the tunnel wall as the searing blue tendrils began siphoning my aura. My body convulsed with an electric shock. "Cyclone reverb," I roared, words that sprang unbidden to my lips. My arms thrust forward, channeling raw red lightning. It coalesced into a swirling vortex of crimson energy, ripping through the tunnel like a whirlwind. The green hologram answered with a sizzling surge of green-laced electricity, pushing my red lightning back. Sparks flew, collided, danced against the metal walls. My silver hair whipped around my face as I clenched my teeth, pushing more power into cyclone reverb. I could feel the very muscles in my arms singing with adrenaline. Yet the hologram's green glow only seemed to intensify. Another wave of azure tendrils slammed into me. Pain exploded in my chest. My aura flickered, threatening to extinguish. This creature was absorbing my energy. And behind it, deeper in the tunnel, I saw a figure cowering. My mother. The instant my eyes landed on her, my heart wrenched with desperate protectiveness. She had long hair of polished silver, so similar to mine. Her face was etched with sorrow and guilt, but I couldn't tell why. I let my guard down for half a second, and that's when I realized the truth. I couldn't overcome this hologram with brute force. I needed something else. Something more personal. Then the hologram's mocking hiss vibrated again, and I felt the life draining from me. Everything slowed, my breathing, my heartbeat, the flicker of my aura. The silver hair that symbolized my power began losing its sheen, turning dull. Something in me snapped. Clenching my fists, I spoke words I had never heard before. "I sacrifice it all, midnight to Genesis." A tidal wave of raw power erupted from my core, and in that instant, my entire identity shifted. I felt the silver draining from each strand of hair, replaced by the black of a moonless midnight. My aura flared an inky, swirling obsidian, swirling with violet undertones. I knew this was a permanent cost. Whatever that silver hair meant for my abilities, it was gone. The black aura blasted forward in a single unstoppable wave, crushing the hologram's protective field. The emerald glow distorted, collapsing in on itself. I seized that moment and lunged, my fists wreathed in black and violet lightning. With a wild shout, I struck the core of the hologram. There was an immense boom. The sheer force of the impact cracked the metal walls around us. The hologram shrieked soundlessly, though it had no mouth, then exploded in a shower of green sparks. I dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. My black hair fell around my face in sweat-soaked strands. My arms trembled from the aftershock of channeling so much destructive energy. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see my mother, but instead, standing with an oddly paternal concern etched into a face that was half phantasmal, half human, was the green hologram once again. But this time it possessed faint features, deep-set eyes, a lined brow. Confusion warred in my mind as I tried to reconcile how I'd just obliterated it. Behind him was my mother, tears in her eyes. "It's your grandfather," she whispered, voice tremulous with mixed emotions. "He's not trying to destroy us. He was testing you." My breath caught in my throat. Grandfather? The game's illusions must have conjured this bizarre storyline. And yet it felt real, viscerally real. The hologram slowly reformed into a half-solid, half-light entity with a gentle green glow. His gaze was fixed on me, and I felt no more hostility. Instead, I sensed longing, regret, a desperation for connection. My mother stepped forward. "I can't leave him here." She cast a sorrowful glance at me. "My father, your grandfather, created this dimension to protect us from something far worse. He may not be fully human anymore, but his heart is here. I'm staying with him, and I want you to stay, too." Shock and confusion wrestled in my mind. I had come all this way, sacrificed my power, to save her from a monster. But there was no monster. Only a broken family, waiting to be whole. For a long moment, I stared at her. My aura flickered with the remnants of midnight to Genesis. My black hair felt foreign on my shoulders. "But we can't stay," I finally said, voice hoarse. "We don't belong here." She placed a hand on my cheek. "We have always belonged here. This place is ours, your grandfather's last creation. It's safe." Something in her eyes told me she wouldn't budge. And something in me recognized a buried longing for acceptance. I found myself nodding, albeit slowly. The game's illusions had me thoroughly entangled. Even though I still remembered I had a life outside, the line was blurring. So, the three of us lingered in that monstrous spire, under the swirling crimson sky. Despite the ominous environment, there was a quiet peace in our small union. Grandfather's features grew clearer, more human with each hour we spent with him. I watched as his luminous green eyes sparkled with relief, with familial love. I soon realized that the illusions in another life could evolve based on your feelings, your subconscious desires. It was an addictive siren call, to stay here, in a realm of infinite possibilities, forging a bond with a family I'd never known. But eventually, the pain in my chest that reminded me of the real world started thrumming again. A voice in the back of my mind hissed warnings. The game was dangerous, time might be flying in the real world, or at the very least, warping. Danny G's testimonial flashed in my memory. I had to re-anchor myself, or else risk forgetting everything outside. In the final moments before I forcibly tore myself away, I looked into my mother's eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She smiled sadly, as if she already knew this was inevitable. Then I let go, recalling the final rule. I had reached a conclusion, albeit an uneasy one, and learned a lesson. It was time to rejoin reality. I slammed back into my body with a gasp, like breaking the surface of an icy lake. My kitchen lights hummed overhead. My heart hammered so fiercely, I thought my ribs might break. The clock read 1:54 a.m. 2 hours had passed since I'd started playing. In that dreamlike dimension, it felt more like 2 days. My entire frame dripped in cold sweat, and I shuddered from afterimages of that crimson sky. I tried to stand but nearly collapsed. My legs felt like jelly, as if they were truly drained of the cosmic energies I'd manipulated. But it was just my mind playing tricks. Wasn't it? I recalled the last step, picturing my treasure sanctuary, that secret place in my mind where I was meant to store an object from the life I'd just experienced. Gingerly, I closed my eyes. In my imagination, a wide, timeless hall opened up, crystal floors reflecting tall vaulted ceilings. It housed relics from other mental adventures I'd conjured throughout my life, a toy sword from childhood daydreams, a half-finished wooden chess set from a game I'd invented in my teens, and now, a new item. A small, rotating orb of swirling green and black energies, symbolizing the union I'd made with my mother and grandfather in that bizarre dimension. Yet no sooner had I placed the orb on a pedestal than a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure, my shadow, as the game's instructions had warned me, lurked in a corner behind a column. It darted forward in a swift, fluid motion, trying to snatch the orb. "Get back," I shouted, even though it was all in my head. My shadow hissed in frustration. Its form was gaunt, vaguely human, but with eyes glowing a disconcerting white. Then it vanished. The orb was safe, for now, but the moment left me shaken. The sanctuary was no longer peaceful. It was a battleground. I opened my eyes again, returning fully to the real world. I felt exhausted. My reflection in the window revealed hair as black as midnight. That startled me so badly I nearly fell over. My real hair was supposed to be brown. Yet here in the real world, it looked black. Possibly a trick of the dim lighting. I flicked the switch on the overhead lamp. Still black. Shock seared my nerves. This was impossible. I combed a trembling hand through the strands. It felt real. I ran to the bathroom mirror. Black as coal. It was a cosmic joke. The game's illusions had left a physical mark on my reality. And that wasn't the end of strange happenings. 30 minutes later, I was sipping a glass of water in the kitchen, trying to calm myself, when my antique UFO detector on the counter let out a shrill beep. It was a silly novelty item I'd found in a yard sale. It supposedly beeped in the presence of exotic electromagnetic fields. Usually, the thing was silent, collecting dust. But now it blared like a siren. I looked at it, fear creeping over me. The instructions for the game never said anything about real-world phenomena. Was something crossing over from another life? I turned the device off, but an uneasy tension lingered in my gut. I needed help. Over the next few days, I scoured the internet for any mention of another life, or J. Bart. I uncovered a small online community, barely over 1,000 members. They discussed the entire top 10 games you can play in your head by yourself, cross-referencing each one with cryptic anecdotes and cautionary tales. One user, Spectral Knight, posted about losing track of time while living as an interstellar bounty hunter, only to re-emerge and discover that an entire weekend had passed in real life. Another user, Willow Blue, claimed they had gleaned arcane knowledge from the games that manifested as advanced painting skills in reality. Most of them had a near obsession with the phenomenon of physical changes, like my hair color shift. Some believed it was a rare side effect of merging identities between illusions and reality. It didn't take long before I stumbled upon a direct reference to the exact scenario I'd lived. A thread discussing the Crimson Tower's dimension, where a faceless green hologram thrived by siphoning aura from unsuspecting travelers. That thread was started by Danny G. My hands shook on the keyboard. The very testimonial I'd read in the library had an online reflection, too. I messaged him, half expecting no response. But within minutes, a tiny icon glowed at the bottom of my screen. "It's dangerous," he wrote. "And it only gets worse the more you invest. But if you want answers, we can meet. Bring your UFO detector." My heart pounded. I typed back, "Why the detector?" He replied, "Some of us suspect that the more time you spend in another life, the more reality warps around you. Electromagnetic surges, psychic rifts, call them what you will. The UFO detector might come in handy if something tries to cross over." We arranged to meet at a cafe near my apartment. I spent the next hours in a haze of anxiety, half expecting green tendrils to burst through my walls. The cafe was cozy, bright with midday sun. People chattered, sipped coffee, oblivious to the swirling cosmic secrets that lurked between their ears. A man in his late 30s waved me over to a corner table. He had disheveled brown hair, a faded jacket, and eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Danny G, I presume?" I greeted. He nodded, glancing warily at my hair. "So, you're the one whose hair changed color," he said by way of introduction. I sank into the chair, feeling out of place. "You've been playing another life a while, haven't you?" He nodded again, tapping a beat on the table. "Too long. I started a few months ago and, well, I lost a chunk of my real life in there. You read my testimonial." I studied his face. I think I got lucky. I escaped fairly quickly. But something happened. My mother and grandfather, they're illusions in that world, but they feel real. My mother wouldn't leave. She said it was safer. And now, my hair, my UFO detector going haywire." Danny frowned. "You've formed a strong bond inside the game, or the dimension, or whatever you want to call it. The more emotional weight it carries, the more it bleeds into your real life. That's what the rest of the community believes. The phenomenon is poorly understood. Some people think it's literally parallel realities bridging. Others think it's just a psychophysical response. But either way, the changes are real." My throat felt dry. "So, how do I stop it from escalating? I can't just abandon my mother in that world. But I don't want to lose my real life either." His gaze turned sympathetic. "Your biggest weapon is the game's own rules. Re-anchoring yourself, ensuring you keep your sanctuary of treasures locked down, and not letting that shadow of yours meddle with your items. If your shadow corrupts the memento from your mother's dimension, you might fully lose your anchor to the real world. Then, well, you might never leave." I felt goosebumps prickle my skin. The memory of that gaunt shadow lunging for the swirling green and black orb. But she's my mother. My grandfather might not be a monster after all. They formed a real family. How can I just ignore that? Danny fixed me with a tired, empathetic stare. "You can't. But you have to be careful. Consider going back in, on your own terms. Lock away or protect the object. That's all I can suggest. As for the UFO detector, keep it nearby. If something crosses over, you'll know. And if you sense things getting worse, log off immediately." His eyes flicked over my shoulder. Someone new had entered the cafe. They looked around suspiciously, then left. Danny swallowed. "There are also others who want the knowledge J. Bart's games can grant. They might try to stop you from controlling your experience." My nerves jangled. "I'll be careful." That night, I barely slept. I had set up my UFO detector on the bedside table, half ashamed that I was prepared for an interdimensional incursion in the middle of the night. My reflection in the mirror was an ever-present reminder, my hair, black as pitch, proving that illusions can rewrite reality. When dawn broke, I made a decision. I would return to another life. But this time, I'd be prepared. I needed to ensure my mother's safety, finalize my relationship with my grandfather's hologram presence, and then properly seal the memory in my sanctuary, safe from my shadow's meddling. I brewed coffee, bracing myself. The moment I finished the final sip, I powered on the UFO detector and set it on my nightstand. Then I sat cross-legged on my bed, closed my eyes, and whispered the words. Rule 1, I choose a life. The life I had in that crimson sky. As soon as I said it, I felt the shift again. Reality splintered, dissolving around me. Then it reformed as a swirl of red clouds, jagged metal spires, and the smell of ozone. The crisp wind bit at my face. I looked down at my body, still wearing that charcoal jumpsuit, still sporting black hair. I felt no intense surge of power like before, but a faint glow of black aura flickered around me. Midnight Degenesis had not returned in full force. I had sacrificed so much of my power in that final blow. With a deep breath, I propelled myself forward, gliding through the air between twisting metal towers. The sky boomed with distant thunder, and I felt an oppressive weight in the air. Something was happening. I followed my instincts, heading straight toward the spire where I had last encountered my mother and grandfather. But halfway there, a shrill cry tore through the wind. Shadows danced along the edges of my vision. Suddenly, I was surrounded by swirling shapes, like living shards of green glass. They spun around me, each one a whirling fragment of the hologram's power. Faceless, crackling with neon light, they flew in wide arcs. I realized they weren't illusions, they were guardians, fragments of my grandfather's will, perhaps, or an entirely new threat. I clenched my fists, black aura shimmering around them. One shard flung itself at me in a cutting spiral. I narrowly dodged, feeling the sharp sting of energy slice across my arm. Blood trickled, but the pain only awakened my adrenaline. "Crimson Edge," I shouted, thrusting a palm forward. My aura coalesced into a blade of sizzling red-black energy that I hurled at the shard. It exploded on impact, shattered into glimmering dust. The other shards advanced in a dizzying flurry, each spinning at a different angle. "Obsidian Wing," I yelled, summoning wide arcs of dark lightning that crackled from my back like ephemeral wings. I soared upward, launching precise blasts of black bolts that cut through the shards. The air hissed with the intensity of the energy. One by one, the shards shattered, but not before several lacerated my arms and shoulders with sizzling blows. Gasping, I hovered in mid-air, swirling with raw tension. My body ached, reminding me that I was weaker than before. If I had faced them in my silver-haired prime, perhaps it would have been easier. But there was no time to lament. A thunderous roar echoed from the spire below. I dove, ignoring the pain, until I landed roughly on a balcony carved into the metal edifice. The architecture bent at impossible angles, forging a labyrinth of corridors and ramps. Standing there was my mother. She looked changed. Her once silver hair was half black, half silver, as if she were caught between transformations. Her eyes glowed faintly green. "You've come back," she said, her voice trembling with a strange reverberation. My stomach twisted. "Mother, what's happening to you?" She turned her gaze to the swirling sky. "Your grandfather is merging his essence with me. He believes if we combine, we can protect this dimension forever." I clenched my fists. "But you'll stop being you. You'll become some extension of him." She smiled ruefully. "I already lost much of myself. Maybe you were right. Maybe we don't belong here. But I love him. I love the father I never truly knew until I stepped into this realm. And I want to keep us all safe." A deeper rumble sounded from inside the spire. My mother stepped aside, and I saw the corridor behind her. The walls pulsed with green light, shaped like throbbing veins. Somewhere within, I felt my grandfather's presence, strong and overwhelming. I advanced cautiously. "Grandfather," I called into the corridor. "Show yourself." A flash of emerald light illuminated the hallway, and he appeared, part hologram, part human. His face was clearer, revealing an older man's kind but weary expression. His eyes, however, glowed with a fervor that looked borderline zealous. "You have returned, grandson." His voice reverberated, no longer just a hiss. "We can complete our family bond now." My mind swam with conflicting emotions. This place felt like a prison and a sanctuary all at once. For a moment, I entertained the notion of giving in, letting the illusions wrap around me. But then I remembered the real world, and the vow I made not to lose myself. "Grandfather," I said firmly, "release your hold on Mother. If you truly love us, let's find a way to exist without enslaving each other's spirits." His expression darkened. "This realm is incomplete. It needs synergy, our synergy. Your mother understands." He raised a translucent hand, emanating swirling green power. It lashed out, hooking around my mother's midsection, pulling her closer to him. She cried out, face contorted in a clash of devotion and terror. Rage flared in me. My black aura sparked violently. "Let her go." He unleashed a wave of green lightning. I countered with my own black arcs, and the corridor lit up with sizzling, swirling energies. The clang of metal echoed. My mother shrank back, fear in her eyes. She was stuck in the vortex of our conflict. I parted my stance, channeling energy into my fists. My arms trembled under the strain. I knew my reserves weren't what they used to be. If I was going to free her, I needed something more. Memories of my silver-haired self flooded me, cyclone reverb, crimson edge, that unstoppable force I once held. But I had sacrificed that power. However, new strength often blossoms in the void left behind by old strength. I took a deep breath and roared, Darkness Overdrive. My entire body erupted in swirling black flames, threaded with violet arcs of electricity. The corridor shook under the sheer pressure of this new technique. I felt my aura's limitations pushed to the brink, forging a brand new, high-risk move. Grandfather's emerald lightning clashed with the black-violet inferno. We locked into a deadly contest of wills, energies crackling in a chaotic storm. My mother flung herself away from the center, collapsing behind a jagged piece of metal to avoid the blasts. Sparks rained like fireworks. My own body threatened to tear apart under the intensity of Darkness Overdrive. The corridor walls buckled, metal screeching. But bit by bit, I advanced, stepping toward him, forcing the green lightning back. Let her go, I yelled, each word reverberating like a thunderclap. His eyes wavered. I saw fear, sadness, and maybe love all swirling together. At the last second, he diverted his lightning upward, letting the brunt of my black inferno crash into him. A boom rattled the entire tower. A shockwave of emerald and black tore through the corridors, sending debris spinning. I dropped to one knee, panting, my entire body screaming in pain. When the smoke cleared, I saw Grandfather slumped against a wall, his form glitching in and out like a damaged hologram. My mother crawled to him, tears streaming down her face. I staggered forward, ignoring the taste of copper in my mouth. Mother. She looked at me, then back at him. With trembling hands, she touched his flickering face. I can't lose him. He's the last link to the family I never got to know in the real world. I swallowed, my heart heavy. We can find another way. Come with me, both of you. The illusions don't have to trap us. We can return to the sanctuary, store the memories. We can figure it out together. A ghost of a smile touched Grandfather's lips. You don't understand. I am the dimension. If I leave, it collapses. Then everything here will be lost. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. She touched his cheek. He's tethered to this reality. If we break the tether. I clenched my fists. Every fiber of my being wanted to find a solution that saved everyone. But I didn't know if that was possible. If the dimension collapsed, would they vanish like dust? Or could they be integrated into my sanctuary, safe from the chaos? My mother looked back at me, something resolute shining in her eyes. I need you to trust me, she said softly. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, she pressed her hand to my grandfather's chest, channeling her own silver aura, what remained of it, into him. Their energies merged, forming a swirl of silver and green. Then she glanced at me with a sad, determined expression. Go, she said. I felt an invisible force pushing me back, as if the dimension itself was casting me out. I opened my mouth to scream, but the swirling red sky tore open overhead, forming a gaping vortex. Reality twisted, and I was wrenched away, catapulted into the swirling darkness beyond. I jolted awake in my bed, drenched in sweat. The UFO detector was shrieking, its needle pinned in the red. A wave of nausea slammed into me, and I lurched forward, clutching my stomach. The bedroom lights flickered, then steadied. Gasping, I grabbed the UFO detector, half expecting a monstrous hologram to materialize in my room. But nothing came. Still, the device shrilled a warning. Some kind of electromagnetic disturbance was present, stronger than before. Fear hammered in my skull. I closed my eyes and envisioned my sanctuary. The vast, ornate hall shimmered into view. At once, I spotted chaos within. Swirling winds battered the relics I had collected, and in the center, my black and green orb was trembling like it was about to burst. My shadow stood next to it, arms raised, trying to siphon its energy. Its eyes glowed a menacing white. If it succeeded, my tenuous connection to that dimension, my mother, my grandfather, might be lost or warped beyond recognition. And worse, I feared it might fully breach into my real world. No, I bellowed in my mind. I manifested inside the sanctuary, illusions layered upon illusions. My shadow spun around, letting out a low hiss. I rushed forward, aura blazing. Lunar reclamation, I roared, a technique I invented on the spot, channeling the flickering remains of my black aura with a new, silvery luminescence that arose from somewhere deep within me, perhaps a vestige of my mother's aura that had latched onto me. A brilliant arc of silver-black energy wrapped around my arms, forming a swirling chain. I lashed it out at the shadow, binding its limbs. It screeched and writhed, eyes wide with fury. I forced it away from the orb, slamming it against the columns lining the sanctuary. The relics rattled. The orb stilled, no longer trembling. The shadow glowered, momentarily subdued. For good measure, I fashioned a mental cage around it, forging metaphysical bars out of shimmering light. I had never done anything like this before, but desperation unlocked new possibilities. The shadow clawed at the bars, but they held, for now. Panting, I knelt by the orb. Flickers of silver and green swirled inside it, interwoven with streaks of black. I felt a faint warmth radiating from it. My mother and grandfather. Perhaps they had found a way to anchor themselves here, through me. I exhaled a shaky breath, grateful that I hadn't lost them entirely. Days passed. I stayed far away from another life, refusing to indulge it. My hair remained black, a permanent reminder. But the UFO detector's shrill alarms gradually died down, no longer registering any bizarre fields. I told Danny G what happened. He listened gravely, then gave a single piece of advice: if you're done, seal the memory. Don't dwell on it. The game is designed to lure you back. I tried. But how do you just abandon a family, illusion or not, knowing that they might be waiting for you? The only consolation was that they lived on in the orb inside my sanctuary, protected from the meddling of my shadow. I still heard my mother's final words echo in my mind: go. She wanted me to live, to preserve the memory of them. Now, the chaos had subsided. Life returned to an approximation of normal. I went to work, typed away at my research, resumed daily tasks. No more illusions intruded. That is, until one night, about a week later. I was in my kitchen, cooking pasta, when the UFO detector started pinging softly, not an all-out alarm, but a steady beep. A chill went down my spine. I turned to see a faint shimmer in the corner of the kitchen. My heart slammed against my ribs. Black aura flickered at my fingertips, my body responding on instinct. But the shimmer shaped itself into a silhouette. A woman, half silver, half black hair, wearing a gentle smile. I was too stunned to move or speak. Slowly, the figure drifted closer, translucent as a ghost. My mother. She reached out, her spectral hand hovering just above my cheek. I couldn't stay away, she said, voice echoing as if from the depths of a dream. The dimension collapsed, but your sanctuary kept me safe. And I missed you. Tears welled in my eyes, unbidden. I didn't know what to do, what to say. This was beyond anything the game's rules had hinted at. A piece of another life, crossing over into my kitchen. How? I managed to choke out. She glanced at the UFO detector, which was going haywire, lights flashing. I followed the resonance. Your anchor. I can't stay long in this form, but I wanted to see you. My real son. She drifted forward, so close I could see faint lines of worry and love etched into her face. This wasn't just a random illusion, it was truly her spirit. Real or not by any official standard, she was my mother in that dimension, someone who had taught me about family, who had chosen to stay with her father, and who had ultimately saved me by casting me out. There was no epic battle now, no monstrous green hologram. Just a quiet, almost tender reunion. Then the beep of the UFO detector grew frantic. Her body flickered. A pained expression crossed her face. I have to go, she whispered. I reached out, wanting to hold her, but my hands passed through empty air. Will I see you again? Her image shimmered, on the verge of dispersing. I'm always with you, in the orb, in your sanctuary, she murmured. Protect it. Don't let your shadow corrupt it. And if you return, we'll be waiting, me and your grandfather, in one form or another. She started fading, her form turning translucent. My heart ached. I clenched my fists, tears blurring my vision. I wanted to speak 1,000 words, ask 1,000 questions. But only one came to my lips: I love you. A soft, gentle smile was her parting gift. Then the shimmering figure blinked out, leaving me alone in the silent kitchen. The detector's beep subsided, returning to its dormant state. I sank to the floor, tears trickling down my cheeks. All the stress, the fear, the battles in that crimson sky, it culminated in this impossible event, this fleeting moment of closure. In time, my breathing steadied. I gazed at the UFO detector, feeling a strange mix of awe and sorrow. Another life was far more than a mere mental game. It was a tapestry woven between worlds, bridging illusions and reality. And somehow, I had become a traveler with the power to cross that bridge. Eventually, I closed my eyes, retreated into my sanctuary, and checked the orb. It glowed softly, uncorrupted, shimmering with silver, green, and black threads. My mother's final message echoed in my mind: protect it. The shadow was still caged, pacing angrily behind the luminous bars. My illusions granted me some measure of control over it now. Maybe, with time, I could even make peace with that part of myself. I withdrew from the sanctuary, rejoining my physical senses in the quiet kitchen. It was late, and I had a life outside of all this to tend to, a job, friends who cared about me, 1,000 little responsibilities that anchored me to normalcy. But I also had a new perspective, that there were worlds within us, games we play in our heads, that can shape our reality in terrifying, beautiful ways. The line between imagination and truth had blurred forever. I touched a strand of my black hair, the living proof of that blur. I had changed. Not just my hair color, but my entire worldview. Once, I believed that illusions were simply figments of the mind, ephemeral dreams. Now, I knew illusions could leave very real scars, and blessings, in their wake. My mother's visit proved that. Every so often, I still feel the pull, the addictive allure of returning to another life, to see them again, to continue forging a bond that started in a realm of swirling red skies and metallic towers. A realm born from the imagination, yet carrying its own weight in the cosmos. But for now, I resist. I have a duty to protect my real-world anchor points, to ensure that if I do return, it's by choice, not compulsion. Maybe someday, I'll re-enter that dimension stronger, more prepared to unify the illusions and reality in a healthy way. At least now I know I won't be alone when I do. My mother and grandfather live on in the orb, waiting in the hush of my sanctuary. And the day I decide to cross back, I'll come armed with every ounce of caution and care I've learned from this ordeal. Until that day comes, I'll keep my UFO detector on the counter, just in case. Because if there's one thing Danny G taught me, it's that the boundaries of existence are more porous than we think. Another life is always beckoning, whispering in the back of our minds. And for better or worse, I have become part of that game's living legacy. The weeks pass without incident. Work life returns to a steady pace, and I find small joys, a good cup of coffee, a friend's laughter, the warmth of sunlight through my window. Yet, every morning, I wake up a little different, maybe a bit more introspective, a bit more aware of the intangible dimensions layering our reality. The day I decide to finalize things, to truly seal my connection, I spend hours preparing. I make sure the shadow remains bound, ensure the orb is stable. Then, in a moment of quiet reflection, I reach into my sanctuary and create a final safe for the orb, thick walls of metal steel, wards etched with imaginary runes. I place the orb gently inside, feeling a tender ache in my chest, like I'm tucking away a piece of my heart. Then, with a whispered goodbye, I step back from the sanctuary, letting it fade from my consciousness. I open my eyes to the real world. My hair is still black. There's no sign of my mother's ghostly silhouette. And the UFO detector remains silent. I exhale a long breath. Peace. That is, until I hear a subtle beep from the device. My pulse jumps. I stare at it, heart pounding. Then it goes silent again, as if it just wanted to remind me that it's there. That another life still lingers in the background, humming with potential. I give a small, wry grin, acknowledging the reminder. I'm ready to live my life, my real life, for now. But when that beep returns in earnest, when it calls me back to that dimension of crimson skies and sprawling metal spires, I won't be afraid. Because I know who I am, what I stand for, and how to return. And I'll be ready to fight again, to learn, to connect with my mother and grandfather. Ready to risk the precarious boundary between illusions and the tangible world. Ready to keep forging a family out of impossible dreams. At last, I stand up from the kitchen table, flick off the light, and let the darkness settle. The UFO detector sits silently on the countertop, the faint glow of its power light a tiny star in the gloom. I walk away, resolute in my choice. I've found my lesson. I've found my anchor. And even if another life's door is always open, I won't be lost in there forever. End.